The word cartel is doing a lot of work in the American imagination that has very little to do with what cartels actually are. In American popular culture, in the news coverage, in the political speeches, in the Netflix series, the cartel is a violence story. It is a story about executions and beheadings in tunnels and the particular horror of organized criminal brutality operating just south of the American border. That story is real. The violence is real. But it is the surface of something much larger and much more interesting and much more disturbing than the violence itself, because the violence is not the point of the cartel. The violence is the enforcement mechanism of an economic system. And the economic system, examined clearly and without the distortion of the crime narrative, is one of the most sophisticated and most durable business enterprises in the history of the Americas. Start with the numbers because the numbers reframe everything. The global illegal drug market is estimated at between $500 billion and $650 billion annually. The Mexican cartels, primarily the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel, control an estimated 40 to 45% of the drug supply entering the United States, which is the largest drug consumer market in the world. The United States drug market alone is worth approximately $150 billion per year by conservative estimates. Mexican cartel revenues from drug trafficking into the United States are estimated by the DEA and independent researchers at between $19 and $29 billion annually. That is not a criminal enterprise operating at the margins of the economy. That is a revenue figure that would place the cartel comfortably inside the Fortune 500 if it were a legal corporation. It would make it larger than American Airlines, larger than Marriott, larger than dozens of companies that appear in business school case studies and financial press coverage as examples of successful enterprise. But drug trafficking is only the beginning of what the modern Mexican cartel is. The transformation from drug trafficking organization to diversified criminal conglomerate happened gradually through the 2000s and accelerated sharply in the 2010s as law enforcement pressure on drug routes increased competition and compressed margins in the core business. The cartels responded the way any rational economic actor responds to margin compression in a core business. They diversified. They found adjacent revenue streams. They leveraged their existing assets, their logistics networks, their territorial control, their enforcement capacity, into new lines of business that had nothing to do with drugs and that are in some ways more economically durable than drug trafficking because they are embedded in legitimate economic activity in ways that are much harder to interdict. The extortion economy is the most visible of these diversification moves and the one that most directly affects ordinary Mexican citizens and businesses. The cartels, particularly in the states and regions where they have established territorial control, levy what amounts to a tax on economic activity. Businesses pay a monthly fee, called derecho de piso, the right to operate on the floor, to the cartel that controls the territory where they operate. Restaurants, construction companies, retailers, farmers, truckers, taxi drivers, street vendors. Anyone conducting economic activity in cartel-controlled territory pays. The amounts vary by the size and profitability of the business. A small taco stand might pay a few hundred pesos a month. A construction company working on a significant project might pay tens of thousands. A large agricultural operation might pay hundreds of thousands. The cartel provides nothing in return except the implicit promise that non-payment will be punished and that payment will be protected from other criminal groups trying to collect the same fee. This is not a new economic arrangement. It is the oldest protection racket in human history, the same basic logic that feudal lords applied to the peasants farming their land and that medieval guilds applied to craftsmen operating in their cities. What is new is the scale at which it operates and the sophistication with which it is administered. The Jalisco New Generation cartel, which emerged as a major force in the 2010s and has expanded rapidly across multiple Mexican states, is estimated by Mexican security researchers to collect extortion revenue from tens of thousands of businesses across the country. The total extortion economy in Mexico is estimated at approximately $5 billion annually. That is $5 billion extracted from the productive economy every year, a tax on commerce paid not to the government that is supposed to regulate commercial activity but to the criminal organization that has established de facto sovereignty over the territory where that commerce occurs. The avocado industry in Michoacán tells the extortion story in its most internationally visible form. Michoacán produces the overwhelming majority of Mexico's avocados, which are worth approximately $3 billion annually in export revenue, primarily to the United States. The avocado boom of the 2010s, driven by the American food culture's sudden and apparently insatiable appetite for guacamole and avocado toast, made Michoacán one of the most economically valuable agricultural regions in Mexico. It also made it one of the most violently contested. The cartels recognized that the avocado orchards of the Tierra Caliente region represented an enormous and growing revenue stream, and they moved to control it. Farmers began receiving demands for derecho de piso. Those who refused were threatened, attacked, had their equipment destroyed, had their workers kidnapped. The cartel established control over packing facilities, over transport routes, over the export logistics chain. By the mid-2010s, independent estimates suggested that a significant percentage of every avocado exported from Michoacán carried an invisible cartel tax embedded somewhere in the supply chain, paid by farmers or packers or transporters at gunpoint and ultimately passed on to American consumers who had no idea it existed. The United States Department of Agriculture temporarily suspended operations of its inspectors in Michoacán in 2023 after cartel threats against the American officials who certify avocados for export. This was a remarkable moment of visibility for a dynamic that had been operating invisibly for years. The avocado on your toast has a cartel economics problem embedded in its price. Not because the cartel grew it. Because the cartel controls the territory where it grows and extracts a rent from everyone who participates in getting it from the tree to the truck to the border. The fuel theft operation, known in Mexico as huachicol, represents a different kind of cartel economic diversification, one that targets state assets rather than private businesses. Pemex, Mexico's state oil company, operates an enormous network of pipelines carrying crude oil and refined petroleum products across the country. The cartels, recognizing this network as a source of extractable value, develop systematic operations for tapping the pipelines illegally and stealing the fuel. At its peak in 2018 and 2019, fuel theft from Pemex pipelines was occurring at more than 12,000 documented illegal tap points per year. The stolen fuel was sold through illegal distribution networks, through corrupt gas stations, through black market channels that stretched from rural Guanajuato to urban Mexico City. Pemex estimated its annual losses from fuel theft at approximately $3 billion in 2018. The incoming López Obrador administration, which took office in December 2018, identified huachicol as a national emergency and made its elimination a central policy priority, closing pipeline valves and switching to tanker truck distribution to cut off the theft. The losses dropped significantly but did not disappear. The cartels adapted, as they always adapt, and fuel theft continues at reduced but significant levels. The mining sector has become another target of cartel economic penetration, particularly in the states of Guerrero, Michoacán, and Sonora, where small-scale mining operations produce gold, silver, and iron ore. The cartels have applied the same territorial control logic to mining that they apply to agriculture, establishing derecho de piso on mining operations, demanding cuts of production, in some cases taking direct operational control of mining sites. The iron ore port of Lázaro Cárdenas in Michoacán, one of Mexico's most important Pacific coast ports, became the subject of significant U.S. law enforcement attention in the mid-2010s when investigators documented that the Knights Templar cartel had established effective control over iron ore exports through the port, collecting fees from Chinese steel companies for the right to load ore onto ships. A Mexican criminal organization was extracting rent from Chinese industrial companies for access to a Mexican port. The economic tentacles of the cartel system had reached across the Pacific.